The chandelier light was too bright. Arya Lawson noticed that first, how the crystal refracted gold across the private lounge, scattering warmth over a room that felt surgically cold. Laughter drifted in from the corridor outside, muffled by velvet walls and glass doors etched with the hotel's crest. A celebration was happening somewhere. Just not for her. She stood frozen at the threshold, one hand still wrapped around the door handle, her pulse pounding so loudly it drowned out the music. Calvin Thorne stood near the center of the room. Relaxed, effortless, whole in a way he hadn't been in years. And in his hands, Arya's vision narrowed. The ring. She knew every facet of it. She had sketched it herself on a napkin during a late-night diner stop, joking that she didn't need diamonds the size of regret, just something that would last. Calvin had laughed then, kissed her knuckles, and promised her forever. Now he slid that ring onto Rita Miller's finger. Perfect fit. Rita gasped softly, one hand flying to her mouth in a performance so well-rehearsed it might as well have been scripted. Calvin, you shouldn't, she said, voice trembling, eyes already shining. You already promised me the nomination for Best Actress. This is too much. It's nothing, Calvin replied easily. Nothing. Arya felt the word land in her chest like a nail. He'd causally given his mistress everything that belonged to her. An assistant hovered nearby, pale and shaking. Sir, that ring was commissioned for Ms. Lawson's. Calvin didn't even look at her. Forget it, he said flatly. If Arya wants another one later, we'll design something else. Later. As if Arya were a delayed meeting. The room tilted. Arya stepped inside. The sound of her heels against marble cut through the space like a gunshot. Rita turned first. Their eyes met. And Rita smiled. Calvin followed Rita's gaze and stiffened. Arya. Who are you giving the nomination to? Arya asked. Her voice was calm, too calm, the kind of calm that came from a decade of swallowing things whole. Silence spread outward, heavy and suffocating. Calvin frowned. This isn't the time. She laughed then, a broken sound that surprised even her. You already donated my ring. What could be a better time than this? Rita shifted, clutching Calvin's arm. I didn't think this would upset her so much, she said softly. I told him he didn't need to do this. I don't care about these materialistic things. She pulled a black card from her clutch and thrust it toward Arya. I'm not that kind of woman. The card fluttered to the floor. Arya stared at it. She remembered that card, 7 years ago. The night Calvin went bankrupt. The way he'd shoved it into her hand and told her to leave him. The way she'd thrown it back and said, I didn't fall in love with your money. Her vision blurred. You already promised me that nomination, Arya said quietly, eyes lifting to Calvin. Are you just regifting everything that belonged to me? Calvin exhaled sharply. Don't be petty, you don't need it. You already have everything. Rita needs this. You've already had your moment, he continued, impatience creeping in. Rita's new, she needs protection. Protection. Arya felt something inside her finally crack. I broke my body for that film, she said. I refused a stunt double. I fell. The wire snapped. You held my hand while they drilled 18 pins into my spine. Her voice trembled now. She didn't stop. I went back to set under injections because you said the timing mattered. Because you said we were building a future together. Calvin's expression hardened. As are you trying to manipulate me? You should know your place, he snapped. The room went very, very quiet. Even Rita froze. Arya felt the words echo through her bones, reverberating against every sacrifice she had ever dressed up as love. Rita recovered first. She bit her lip, eyes shining. Calvin, don't be angry because of me. He moved instantly. Scooping Rita into his arms, he turned toward his staff. Transfer all of Arya Lawson's resources to Rita Miller, effective immediately. The order was absolute. Final. As he carried Rita out, she looked over his shoulder. And smiled. That was when Arya understood. She had never been loved. She had simply been useful. The room swayed violently. Pain exploded through her spine, sharp, blinding, familiar. Arya staggered back, her heel catching on the discarded black card. She fell hard, her back slamming into the edge of the marble table. Someone screamed. Someone else shouted her name. But the damage was already done. The old injury, never healed, never respected, gave way. As Arya lay on the cold floor, sensation draining from her legs, she stared at the chandelier above. The light fractured into 1,000 shimmering pieces. How strange, she thought distantly. Even now, it's beautiful. Her last thought wasn't rage. It was exhaustion. I loved him. I gave him everything. Then everything went dark. Arya Lawson woke up without pain. No white-hot ache blooming along her spine. No familiar stiffness in her hands from sleeping wrong because her back wouldn't allow anything else. No dull nausea from medication she hadn't remembered taking. Just breath. For a moment, she lay still, waiting for it to catch up to her. The ceiling above her was wrong. Too clean. The faint water stain near the corner, the one she'd stared at for months during sleepless nights, was gone. Morning light spilled through sheer curtains she distinctly remembered throwing out years ago. Her heartbeat quickened. Arya pushed herself upright. Her body responded immediately. That was when memory hit her. Not gently, not like a dream unraveling. It came whole. The VIP lounge. Soft gold lighting. The smell of expensive liquor and someone else's perfume. The ring. Not just any ring, her ring. The one she'd helped design years ago, joking about how she didn't need something flashy, how she'd rather it be timeless. She remembered how it looked on Rita Miller's finger. How easily it slid into place. Arya's breath caught, sharp and sudden, as if her body had finally realized it was supposed to be drowning. She pressed her palm flat against her chest, grounding herself. The room didn't dissolve. The world didn't tilt. Everything stayed solid, infuriatingly real. Her phone sat on the bedside table. She already knew what date it would show. Still, her fingers trembled as she picked it up. 7 years earlier. Before the accident. Before the award circuit. Before she sold pieces of herself, literally and figuratively, to keep a man afloat who never learned how to swim on his own. A quiet laugh escaped her. It sounded wrong in the room, like a stranger testing her voice. Arya swung her legs over the side of the bed and stood. The floor was cold beneath her feet. She welcomed the sensation. Proof. Confirmation. She walked to the mirror. The woman staring back at her looked younger, softer in ways she hadn't felt in years. No shadows carved too deeply beneath her eyes, no careful tension in her posture from guarding old injuries. But her eyes were the same. Clear, awake, unforgiving. I remember, she said aloud. Her reflection didn't flinch. In her first life, love had been a debt she paid in advance. She remembered every bargain she'd made with herself. Just get through this. Once he's stable, it'll be different. This is what commitment looks like. She remembered how tired she'd been when she believed those things. Arya turned away from the mirror and reached for the closet door. Inside hung clothes she hadn't worn in years, before comfort had replaced style, before practicality had become her armor. Somewhere, not far from this apartment, Calvin Thorne was still the man who claimed he needed her. Still pre-success. Still full of plans. Still certain the world would bend eventually. In her first life, she had bent with it. This time, she felt nothing but a calm, settling certainty. She would not warn him. She would not save him. She would not shrink herself to make his future easier. Arya dressed carefully, deliberately. Each movement felt like a quiet promise made only to herself. This time, she would not bleed where no one would bandage her. She picked up her phone, scrolled past unread messages, and deleted nothing. There was no rush. She had 7 years. And she intended to keep every single piece of herself this time. Arya Lawson did not announce that she had changed. She simply stopped performing the version of herself everyone expected. That morning, the apartment was filled with soft light and the muted hum of the city waking below. Calvin leaned against the kitchen counter, sleeves rolled up, hair still damp from the shower. There was a time, a long time, when this sight alone would have softened her. When she would have read his posture, anticipated the tension in his shoulders, prepared herself to carry it with him. Victor called again, Calvin said, tapping his phone against the counter. He thinks we should accelerate. Arya stirred her tea slowly. Accelerate what? She asked. Calvin blinked. The fund, the tech acquisition, everything. In her first life, she had known. She had known the spreadsheets better than he did, memorized investor names, quietly nudged him away from reckless optimism without ever saying no. Now she just looked at him. It sounds ambitious, she said. That was all. Calvin frowned, searching her face. You don't think it's too fast? There it was. Not arrogance, not entitlement. Fear. For a flicker of a second, Arya saw the man from years ago, the one who had stood in the rain outside a closed bank, hands shaking as he told her she deserved better. The man who had pushed a black card into her palm and said, "Leave me, I'll understand." She remembered how genuine that moment had been. I think you'll decide what feels right, she said gently. Calvin exhaled, relieved and unsettled. You've always been good at grounding me, he said, half smiling. Arya calmly met his gaze, with a quiet hem. She finished her tea and left before he could ask more. The call from Mara Chen came mid-morning. Arya recognized the cadence of urgency immediately. the way her manager spoke when she was trying not to hope too much. "Arya," Mara said, "the Glass House studio is circling back." Arya closed her eyes. In her first life, this had been the call she delayed returning. The one she'd let go to voicemail while she sat beside Calvin, reassuring him that turning it down didn't matter. "What about it?" Arya asked calmly. "Asheville Harbor," Mara continued. "Female lead, long shoot, prestige circuit, they want you." Silence stretched between them. Mara held her breath. "I'll take it," Arya said. The line went dead quiet. "You," Mara laughed sharply. "You're serious?" "Yes." "No conditions." "Send me the contract." "Yes, finally," Mara said excitedly. "You should have always said yes to things like this." Arya smiled faintly. "I know." The Glass House studio buzzed with quiet intensity, glass walls, polished concrete, people moving with purpose that bordered on reverence. Arya walked through the halls like someone who belonged there, because she did. She noticed Rita Miller before Rita noticed her. Rita stood near the casting board, surrounded by 2 assistants, her laughter just a little too loud, her posture a little too stiff. She wore confidence like armor, bright, sharp, reflective. When Rita finally turned and saw Arya, her smile faltered. Then recovered. "Oh," Rita said, stepping forward quickly. "Ms. Lawson." Arya inclined her head. "Rita." Rita's eyes flicked behind Arya for half a second, toward the closed casting room doors, then back again. "I didn't expect to see you here today." Arya regarded her calmly. "It's a work day." Arya smiled faintly. "I like knowing what I'm agreeing to." Rita laughed, but it came out thin. "Of course, I just meant, well, people like you don't usually need to fight for roles anymore." Arya studied her closely then, not as a rival, but as a phenomenon. Rita's fingers fidgeted at her sleeve. Her gaze darted toward the casting rooms, toward the doors that determined worth. "You seem nervous," Arya observed quietly. Rita stiffened. "I'm not. I didn't say it was a bad thing." For a moment, something raw flashed across Rita's face. Then the smile snapped back into place. "I just believe talent should speak for itself." Arya nodded. "It usually does, eventually." The word hung there, eventually, gentle and devastating. Rita's smile tightened. "I'm still new," she said, as if daring Arya to contradict her. "But I work hard, I don't expect special treatment." Arya met her gaze, unblinking. "Then you'll be fine." For a split second, relief crossed Rita's face. Then insecurity rushed in to replace it. "Well," Rita said brightly, stepping back, "I should get ready. Wouldn't want to miss my turn." She moved away quickly, heels clicking a little faster than before. Arya watched her go, not with hostility, but with understanding. Rita wasn't dangerous yet. She was hungry. And hunger, in this industry, always found something to attach itself to. Arya turned and continued down the hall, her reflection sliding smoothly along the glass beside her. That evening, Arya went home. Her grandparents listened in silence as she explained her new role, her voice steady, unhurried. Her grandfather tapped his cane thoughtfully against the floor. "We've received another proposal," he said at last. "It would stabilize your future." In her first life, she'd refused instantly. "I'm not declining," Arya said now. "I'm also not committing." Her grandmother's brows rose slightly. "I'm weighing my options," Arya continued. "I don't want to rush into an alliance recklessly." A slow smile spread across her grandmother's face. "Good," she said. "You finally sound like yourself." When Arya left, she realized something startling. She wasn't afraid of disappointing anyone. Calvin noticed the shift that night. He leaned against the bedroom doorway, watching Arya sit on the couch with a script balanced on her knees, the city's reflected lights moving faintly across the page. She looked calm, focused, too composed. "You didn't tell me about the Glass House role," he said. Arya didn't look up. "You didn't ask." It wasn't sharp, that almost made it worse. Calvin hesitated, then crossed his arms. He stopped, searching for the right words. "I worry about you sometimes." That was real. Arya felt it immediately. The sincerity, the familiar tone he used when he thought he was protecting her from something or from herself. She turned a page. "I know. You've been carrying a lot lately," he continued. "I don't want you burning yourself out for things that don't matter." Her fingers paused on the paper. "Things that don't matter." "I won't," she said calmly. Calvin stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You know, if something ever got too heavy, if you wanted to slow down, I'd understand." Arya looked up then. He wasn't manipulating her, not yet. He was afraid of losing control of the version of her that had always orbited him. "I know you would," she said. And she did. That was the tragedy of it. Calvin relaxed at her answer, mistaking it for reassurance. "Good," he said softly. "I just don't want you pushing yourself because of me." Her chest tightened, not with pain but with recognition. "I won't," Arya replied. She meant it. He smiled, satisfied, and left her alone with her script. He didn't hear the rest. "This time, I'm not building my life around you." Outside, the city pulsed, glass and steel and momentum. Arya returned to the page. The glass house studio was quiet in a way that made people lower their voices instinctively. Arya felt it the moment she stepped inside, an absence of chaos rather than the presence of control. No assistants sprinting down corridors, no producers shouting into headsets. People moved with purpose, not panic. Mara Chen leaned in as they passed security. "Don't be late, don't oversell, and whatever you do, don't apologize for existing," she murmured. Arya glanced at her. "You sound nervous." Mara huffed softly. "I respect him, there's a difference." That earned Arya's attention. They passed a cluster of junior staff near the elevators. Someone whispered, not quite quietly enough, "That's her," followed by a sharp SHH. Another voice murmured, "She's calmer than I expected." Arya didn't react, she never did. But she noticed everything. The conference room doors were already open. Inside, a man stood near the window, city light cutting across his profile. He was tall, not imposing, but solid, like he belonged to the space without trying to claim it. Dark hair, neatly kept. Sharp features softened by stillness rather than charm. Handsome, Arya registered distantly, but not in the polished, aggressive way the industry preferred. There was restraint in him, a sense that nothing about his appearance was accidental, yet nothing begged to be admired. An assistant approached him with a tablet. "Mr. Reed, the revised schedule." Darien Reed took the tablet, glanced at it, then handed it back. "Push the afternoon meeting by 20 minutes, he said calmly. The assistant blinked. "Sir." "They skipped lunch," Darien repeated, already turning back to the window. "That's not a productivity flex." "Of course, sir," the assistant said quickly. Mara slowed beside Arya. "He remembers things like that," she murmured. "That's why people stay." Darien turned as they entered. His gaze landed on Arya, not lingering, not dismissive, just precise. "You're early," he said. "So are you," Arya replied. A flicker of amusement crossed his eyes, gone as quickly as it appeared. "Habit." They shook hands. His grip was firm, brief, professional. No squeeze meant to impress. No lingering warmth meant to confuse. He gestured to the table. "Please." As they sat, a pair of producers slipped in quietly. One of them, Mara Chen recognized immediately, was Lena Ortiz, Glass House's casting director. Lena offered Arya a nod that was sharp, curious. "So this is the Arya Lawson who turned us down once," Lena said lightly. Arya met her gaze. "This is the Glass House that doesn't ask twice." Darienne's mouth curved, just barely. "Fair," Lena laughed. "I've seen your previous roles, though, and couldn't forgive myself if I didn't try again." Darienne pulled up the script, fingers moving with unhurried confidence. "You read the revised third act?" "Yes." "Your thoughts?" "The character doesn't regret the choice," Arya said. "She regrets the cost, but she'd do it again. That matters." One of the producers frowned slightly. "Doesn't that make her seem less sympathetic?" Darienne didn't look at him. "No, it makes her honest." The producer fell silent. Arya felt something shift, not excitement, not relief. Validation. Darienne turned to her. "You don't soften characters to be liked." "I don't believe women need to be palatable to be understood." He studied her then, openly, without heat. "That's consistent with your body of work." Across the room, Lena raised an eyebrow. "You've done your homework." "I don't work blind," Darienne replied. They moved through scene after scene. Darienne challenged Arya's choices without undermining her. When she pushed back, he listened, really listened, then adjusted. When someone else interrupted her, he waited until she finished before responding. It was subtle, but Arya noticed. Outside the room, voices drifted through the glass. "Is that him?" Darienne Reed, "Yeah." "They say he shut down a whole production because a crew member collapsed." "He doesn't yell. He remembers your name." "He's impossible to work around, but incredible to work with." Arya heard every word. At one point, an assistant knocked softly. "Mr. Reed the next." Darienne glanced at Arya. 5 minutes. The assistant nodded and left without question. When the meeting ended, no one rushed her out. Darienne stood. "I won't pressure you," he said. "This role demands clarity from both sides." Arya gathered her things slowly. "You're not worried I'll say no?" "I am," he admitted, "but I won't rush you into a yes." That honesty landed harder than charm ever could. As she turned to leave, Lena caught her eye. "If you take this," she said quietly, "it will change how people see you." Arya paused. "Good." In the hallway, Mara exhaled like she'd been holding her breath the entire time. Okay, she said. I get it now. Get what? Mara smiled at her. Why he's dangerous. Arya didn't answer. She was thinking of the way Darian had waited. Of how he had made space without asking for gratitude. Of how no one had needed to diminish themselves for the room to function. Behind her, through the glass, Darian Reed returned to his seat, already absorbed in another file. Unchanged, yet unmistakably aware. For the first time since her rebirth, Arya felt something stir that had nothing to do with fear or survival. Possibility. Arya hadn't planned on staying. The cafe sat halfway down a narrow side street, wedged between a used bookstore and a florist that smelled faintly of rain-soaked leaves. It was quiet in the mornings, too quiet for meetings, too slow for people with places to be. She liked it because no one hurried her out. She ordered the same thing she always did and took her usual seat by the window, script untouched in her bag. This wasn't a work stop. This was a pause. She just lifted her cup when the chair across from her shifted. Is this seat taken? Arya looked up. It took her a heartbeat, longer than she liked to recognize him outside the glass house. No jacket, no tailored stillness, hair slightly mussed like he'd run his hands through it without noticing. Darian Reed. No, she said automatically. Then after a beat, yes, no, it's fine. Something like amusement flickered across his face. Good, he said, already sitting. They make the best coffee on this block. You come here often. The question slipped out before she could stop it. More than I should, he replied. I live nearby. That explained it, the ease, the lack of performance. For a moment, they sat in silence, not the deliberate quiet of meetings, but the unguarded kind that didn't demand explanation. This isn't a work ambush, Darian said eventually. I promise. I didn't think it was. Good. He took a sip of his coffee, grimaced slightly, then added sugar without comment. That humanized him more than anything else had. They didn't talk about the script. They talked about the bookstore next door, about how the florist never labeled prices, about how the city felt smaller in the mornings. Arya found herself laughing, softly, surprised by it. You don't talk much when you're not working, she observed. Darian tilted his head. Neither do you. She considered that. I suppose I don't. Another pause, not awkward, curious. When they finally stood to leave, there was no promise to do this again, which somehow made it feel more significant. The next time she saw him, it was loud. Mara had dragged her out, dragged to a rooftop bar filled with half-industry people and half-hopefuls pretending not to network. Music pulsed through the air, conversations overlapping in flashes of ambition and complaint. Arya leaned against the railing with Lena Ortiz and two other actresses she vaguely knew. He's here, Lena murmured suddenly. Arya didn't need to ask who. Darian stood near the bar, jacket slung over a chair, laughing quietly at something a man with salt and pepper hair had said. There were three of them friends, not subordinates. Comfortable, unimpressed by the room. She noticed how Darian listened, how he let others finish, how he smiled more easily here. One of the actresses nudged Arya. You know him, right? Professionally. The woman said skeptically. He doesn't usually linger. As if summoned, Darian looked up. Their eyes met across the crowd. No wave, no smile. Just recognition. Later, Mara leaned in, voice low. You're doing that thing. What thing? The one where you pretend you don't feel something. Arya didn't answer. Across the terrace, Darian's friend clapped him on the shoulder. You're distracted. Darian didn't deny it. They spoke again near the end of the night, by chance rather than design. You don't like crowds, Darian said, handing her a glass of water instead of a drink. You noticed. You keep positioning yourself near exits. She glanced at him, and you. I don't like watching people perform hunger, he replied. It's exhausting. That made her smile, a real one. For a moment, the city fell away. Not because they touched, but because neither of them tried to. Arya hadn't planned on staying. The cafe sat halfway down a narrow side street, wedged between a used bookstore and a florist that smelled faintly of rain-soaked leaves. It was quiet in the mornings, too quiet for meetings, too slow for people with places to be. She liked it because no one hurried her out. She ordered the same thing she always did and took her usual seat by the window, script untouched in her bag. This wasn't a work stop. This was a pause. She just lifted her cup when the chair across from her shifted. Is this seat taken? Arya looked up. It took her a heartbeat, longer than she liked to recognize him outside the glass house. No jacket, no tailored stillness, hair slightly mussed like he'd run his hands through it without noticing. Darian Reed. No, she said automatically. Then after a beat, yes, no, it's fine. Something like amusement flickered across his face. Good, he said, already sitting. They make the best coffee on this block. You come here often. The question slipped out before she could stop it. More than I should, he replied. I live nearby. That explained it, the ease, the lack of performance. For a moment, they sat in silence, not the deliberate quiet of meetings, but the unguarded kind that didn't demand explanation. This isn't a work ambush, Darien said eventually. I promise. I didn't think it was. Good. He took a sip of his coffee, grimaced slightly, then added sugar without comment. That humanized him more than anything else had. They didn't talk about the script. They talked about the bookstore next door, about how the florist never labeled prices, about how the city felt smaller in the mornings. Arya found herself laughing, softly, surprised by it. You don't talk much when you're not working, she observed. Darien tilted his head. Neither do you. She considered that. I suppose I don't. Another pause, not awkward, curious. When they finally stood to leave, there was no promise to do this again, which somehow made it feel more significant. The next time she saw him, it was loud. Myra had dragged her out, dragged to a rooftop bar filled with half-industry people and half-hopefuls pretending not to network. Music pulsed through the air, conversations overlapping in flashes of ambition and complaint. Arya leaned against the railing with Lena Ortiz and two other actresses she vaguely knew. He's here, Lena murmured suddenly. Arya didn't need to ask who. Darien stood near the bar, jacket slung over a chair, laughing quietly at something a man with salt and pepper hair had said. There were three of them friends, not subordinates. Comfortable, unimpressed by the room. She noticed how Darien listened, how he let others finish, how he smiled more easily here. One of the actresses nudged Arya. You know him, right? Professionally. The woman said, he doesn't usually linger. As if summoned, Darien looked up. Their eyes met across the crowd. No wave, no smile. Just recognition. Across the terrace, Darien's friend clapped him on the shoulder. You're distracted. Darien didn't deny it. They spoke near the end of the night, by chance rather than design. You don't like the crowds, Darien said, handing her a glass of water instead of a drink. You noticed. You keep positioning yourself near exits. She glanced at him, and you. I don't like watching people perform desperation, he replied. It's exhausting. That made her smile, a real one. For a moment, the city fell away. By the third time Arya ran into Darien Reed, it no longer felt like coincidence. Not fate either. Something quieter. Something like routine forming, where it hadn't been invited. The cafe had become a shared territory. Not intentionally, neither of them claimed it, but patterns had a way of announcing themselves. Darien always came in just after 9, usually with a book he never seemed to finish. Arya arrived earlier, stayed longer, spread herself thin across the table like she was occupying space she'd once been afraid to take. They didn't always sit together. Sometimes they just exchanged a look. Sometimes a nod. Once, when the barista burned Darien's espresso for the second time that week, Arya slid her own cup across the table without thinking. You don't have to, he said. You look like you're about to declare war, she replied. He smiled then, small, private. Truce accepted. From that day on, they shared a silent understanding about the cafe's failings. When the music got too loud, Darien raised an eyebrow. When someone took a call on speakerphone, Arya's mouth flattened and Darien's lips twitched. Common enemies were underrated, Arya thought. It was Mara who noticed first. You laugh differently around him, she said one afternoon as they walked out of the cafe together. Arya frowned. I don't laugh differently. You do, Mara insisted. It's quieter, like you're not trying to convince anyone. That unsettled her more than it should have. Later that week, Arya found herself at a small industry dinner Lena had insisted she attend. It was held in a private room above a restaurant that wanted badly to feel exclusive. Low lighting, long table, wine poured too quickly. The kind of place where people leaned in close not for intimacy, but for advantage. Too many egos. Too little food. Arya lingered near the edge of the room, glass in hand, posture polite but closed. She listened more than she spoke, smiled when expected, let conversations pass over her like weather. That was when she noticed him. Darien wasn't holding court, he wasn't networking, he wasn't even standing straight. He was laughing. Not the controlled, quiet curve she'd seen before, but an actual laugh, head tipped back slightly as a man with salt and pepper hair pulled him into a rough hug that nearly knocked them both sideways. You still don't flinch, the man said, squeezing harder. One day I'll catch you off guard. Unlikely, Darien replied dryly, though he didn't pull away. The woman beside them snorted. She had sharp eyes, an even sharper mouth, and the posture of someone who had never learned to soften herself for comfort. Says the man who once let me steal his seat on a 6-hour flight because I looked tired, she said. Heroic, stupid, still counts. Darien rolled his eyes. Sophia. Arya watched from across the room, something in her chest shifting. Not excitement, not jealousy. Recognition. This was him, unguarded. Looser. Less measured. Still reserved, but softened around the edges, like a coat unbuttoned indoors. Darien noticed her first, and Sophia followed his line of sight without turning her head. Oh, she said, eyes flicking toward Arya. Then she was already moving, striding across the room before Darien could even attempt to stop her. You're the actress. Arya blinked. I have a name. Sophia turned fully then, assessing her openly. Not cruelly. Thoroughly. Like someone evaluating structural integrity rather than surface polish. Good, she said at last, nodding once. So does he forgets that sometimes. Across the room, Darien's mouth twitched like he'd heard it anyway. Drinks were poured. Conversations loosened. The table fractured into smaller clusters. Someone launched into a loud, self-important monologue about international box office numbers and prestige optics. Sophia listened for exactly 3 sentences. Then she leaned an elbow on the table beside Arya, voice dry. Don't worry, she said. If you stay long enough, someone will explain Darien Reed to you, loudly. Arya glanced at her. Is that so? Oh yes. They'll tell you he's the youngest executive to greenlight a Cannes entry in the last decade, that he turned a mid-budget drama into a cultural moment, that he's difficult but brilliant, which usually just means he doesn't flatter men who expect it. As if summoned, the man across from them cleared his throat. Reed's track record speaks for itself, he said, nodding toward Darien's empty chair. Glass House wouldn't be what it is without him. Sophia didn't look at him. Careful, she said lightly. You're veering into resume territory. The man laughed, uncertain whether he'd been insulted. Arya didn't react. She sipped her drink, expression unchanged. Sophia watched her over the rim of her own glass. You're not impressed, Sophia observed. I'm listening, Arya replied. There's a difference. That earned her a sharp, genuine smile. Good answer. Someone else chimed in, something about awards, about influence, about leverage, about how Darien could have anyone he wanted. Sophia rolled her eyes, so hard, it was a wonder she didn't strain something. He hates when people say that, she said, almost fondly, as if humans are collectibles. Arya's gaze flicked briefly, instinctively, toward where Darien stood across the room, deep in conversation, posture relaxed but alert. She looked back at Sophia. I don't collect people either, Arya said. Sophia studied her for a long moment. Not assessing now. Confirming. When Darien finally drifted over, drawn by proximity rather than intention, Sophia leaned in and murmured, just loud enough to be overheard. She's not impressed by your resume. Darien glanced at Arya. She was already watching Sophia, lips pressed together, eyes bright with restrained amusement. She had definitely heard. That's a relief, Darien said evenly. Sophia grinned, victorious. It became a joke between the 3 after that. Resume moments, they called them. Whenever someone postured too hard, name-dropped too loudly, or tried to steer the conversation toward their own importance, one of them would mutter, resume, under their breath. The others would hide a smile. Once, during a particularly painful monologue about disrupting the industry, Arya caught Darien's eye across the table. He didn't smile. He just lifted his glass a fraction. She nearly laughed into hers. It was like Sophia adopted her for the night. Arya learned things she wouldn't have thought to ask. Not from Darien directly, not at first, but from the way his friends spoke about him when he wasn't trying to manage the narrative. That's why he's like that, Eli said later, gesturing vaguely toward Darien, who had stepped away to take a call. Oldest sibling energy. Sophia scoffed. He practically raised Claire. Eli nodded. After their mom died, Dad worked constantly. Darien learned early how to wait, how to hold space. Arya absorbed that quietly. He hates hospitals, Eli added, almost as an afterthought. Won't admit it. And mornings, Sophia said. Loves them, insists they're honest. Arya glanced toward Darien, who was listening intently to someone else, expression attentive but detached. He doesn't talk about the studio deal either, Eli continued. The one he walked away from. What deal? Arya asked. Sophia's gaze sharpened. They wanted him to replace a female director mid-production, without telling her. Arya stilled. He said no, Eli said simply. Walked, lost a lot of money. He doesn't talk about that, Eli added, quieter now, but it's why I trust him. When Darien returned, conversation shifted. The moment passed. But the shape of him had changed in Arya's mind. Darien learned things too. Not through interrogation. Through observation. That Arya ran when she was overwhelmed, literally. That she drifted toward quiet corners when rooms grew too loud. That she disliked being interrupted mid-thought and remembered exactly who did it anyway. And that there was someone else. A long-term boyfriend in finance, mentioned sparingly, never framed as a shield or an excuse. Just present, a fact carried with care. You talk about him carefully, Sophia observed later that night, blunt as ever, as Arya reached for her coat. Arya didn't bristle. I choose my words carefully, she said. That tracks, Sophia replied. Darien does too. She paused, eyes flicking between them. That's why this feels, she searched for the word, then smiled thinly, dangerous. Darien returned just then, catching the tail end of it. What feels dangerous? He asked. Sophia smiled sweetly. Nothing you need to fix. She grabbed her bag and disappeared before either of them could respond. Arya and Darien stood there a moment longer than necessary. Not close. Not distant. Aware. The room buzzed around them, but something quieter had settled between their steps, an understanding neither of them tried to name. Yet, the park by the river became another shared space. Not scheduled, just overlapping. Arya jogged there when scripts tangled in her head. Darien walked when he needed to think without being watched. Sometimes they crossed paths. Sometimes they walked together for a stretch, conversation light, unburdened. One afternoon, Darien's sister, Claire, joined them, bright-eyed, curious, immediately clocking the dynamic. So, she said cheerfully, falling into step beside Arya, are you the reason my brother suddenly owns jogging shoes? Darien groaned, Claire. Arya laughed before she could stop herself. Claire grinned, I like her. I haven't agreed to anything, Arya said lightly. Good, Claire replied. Neither has he. You'd be surprised how rare that is. When Claire peeled off with a wave, Darien looked faintly embarrassed. She means well. I can tell, Arya said. She knows you. That's debatable. No, Arya said gently, it's not. They slowed near the river, the late afternoon sun stretching shadows across the path. This was when Arya felt it, not a sudden realization, but a gradual weight settling into place. She didn't need to announce her relationship. Darien already knew. From the careful phrasing, from the boundaries she never tested, from the way she always left first. I should head back, she said eventually. Darien nodded, of course. They stood there a moment too long. Not because they didn't know what to say. Because they knew exactly what they weren't saying. As Arya walked away, she didn't feel like she was leaving something behind. She felt like she was carrying something forward. Quietly. Carefully. And somewhere behind her, Darien Reed watched her go, not with longing, but with something steadier. Recognition. The city felt heavier that week. Not louder, not crueler, just denser, like the air before rain that never quite came. Arya moved through her days with a careful steadiness, aware of every choice she made, every word she didn't say. She noticed how often she exhaled when she was alone. The cafe mornings with Darien continued, not as appointments, never acknowledged as such. Some days they spoke, some days they didn't, sometimes they shared a table, sometimes only a look. One morning, a man at the counter began talking too loudly to anyone who would listen, listing credits, festivals, numbers, as if proof of relevance might expire if not recited regularly. Arya didn't react, she rarely did. Darien watched for a moment, then tore the corner from a napkin and slid it across the table. Resume. Arya followed his gaze to the man, then back to the napkin. Arya bit the inside of her cheek to keep from smiling. That was the danger of it. Not intensity. Not longing. Ease. Calvin noticed the change before she did. He always did. It was the way she paused before answering questions now. The way she no longer filled silences for him, didn't rush to smooth the air, didn't offer reassurances he hadn't asked for. The way she listened, really listened, when he talked about work, but no longer rearranged herself to make it lighter. Arya was aware of it too, just not consciously. She felt it in the way her shoulders stayed tense long after conversations ended, in how she counted her breaths when she stood beside him in the kitchen, in how often she reminded herself, stay present, this is not before. They sat across from each other at dinner one night, plates untouched. The food had gone cold between them without either noticing. You're tired, Calvin said. The words were gentle, they always were. I've been busy, she replied automatically. That's not what I meant. She looked up then. For a moment, she saw him the way she used to, careful, composed, trying to hold something steady with both hands. The version of him who had once looked at her with guilt and love tangled together and said, you shouldn't have to suffer with me. Her chest tightened. He didn't accuse, he never did. Calvin preferred observation, gentle, reasonable, framed as concern. That was how he kept himself from feeling cruel. "I worry about you," he continued. "You're always holding something." Arya's fingers curled slowly around her fork. She focused on the pressure of the metal against her skin, grounding herself. "You held everything last time," a voice in her memory whispered. "You held him and the future and the damage." "I've always been like this," she said quietly. That wasn't a lie, it was just incomplete. He nodded. "I know, he hesitated, as if weighing the version of himself he wanted to be in this moment. "I don't think you should have to." There it was. That familiar shape of care that felt like release and distance all at once. In another life, those words had sounded like love, like sacrifice, like proof that he saw her. Now they landed differently. They felt like a door being opened from the other side. Arya swallowed. She didn't reach for him, she didn't reassure him, she let the space remain. And in that space, she felt the ache, not sharp, not dramatic, but deep and persistent. Grief for what they had been, fear of what he might become, and something quieter, more dangerous still. Relief that she no longer had to pretend this was enough. She met his eyes, steady but not unkind. "I hear you," she said. Calvin exhaled, almost imperceptibly, as if he'd been waiting for permission. And Arya realized, with a clarity that made her heart ache, that this conversation wasn't the beginning of an ending. It was the middle. Later that night, when she went for a run by the river, she saw Darian ahead of her, walking alone this time, phone tucked away, hands in his pockets. They didn't stop at first. They matched pace without comment. "You look like you're thinking too loudly," Darian said eventually. Arya huffed a quiet laugh. "That obvious. You forget to look left when you do that." She slowed, he slowed too. They stood near the water, city lights trembling on the surface, like something unsure of itself. "You don't have to say anything," Darian added. "I just thought I'd tell you, you don't seem lost." She turned to him. "No," she said after a moment, "just recalibrating." He nodded once, no follow-up, no curiosity sharpened into intrusion. That was his tell. Darian Reed never reached for what wasn't offered. The industry moved around them regardless. Rita's name began surfacing more frequently, bright, breathless, just sharp enough to feel intentional. Calvin mentioned her once offhand, like a detail that didn't matter. Arya noticed the way he said it. Not fond. Not dismissive. Evaluative. The same way he'd once spoken about investments, about risks, about potential. Something cold slid into place in her chest. She told herself she was imagining it. She told herself she was projecting memory onto the present, but memory was not imagination. Memory was experience, and her body recognized the shape of what was forming, even if her mind refused to name it yet. Myra clocked it too. "You're lighter," she said one afternoon, studying Arya over her coffee, but also bracing. "That's not comforting. It's honest." That night, Arya came home late. Calvin was already there, jacket folded neatly, phone face down on the counter. The apartment felt staged, too orderly, like a room waiting to be vacated. He'd been waiting. Not anxiously. Deliberately. Her pulse slowed instead of spiking. That, more than anything, told her what was coming. "I've been thinking," he said. Arya didn't interrupt him. In another life, she might have filled the space, softened the moment, tried to manage the landing. She didn't do that now. "I don't think I'm what you need right now." The words landed softly, carefully chosen, familiar. Her chest tightened, not with shock, but with recognition so sharp it almost hurt. He went on, voice calm. "You're changing, growing into something I don't want to slow down, and he hesitated, just enough to feel sincere. "I don't want to be something you carry." For a brief, traitorous second, she saw it all again. The future that had already happened. The exhaustion. The quiet betrayals framed as inevitability. The moment he had looked at her with guilt and affection tangled together, and assumed she would stay anyway. She felt it then. Not shock. Understanding. This wasn't a plea. It was a release, offered on his terms, before she could offer it herself because he already felt her pulling away. She swallowed, her throat burned. "Is this what you want?" she asked. Calvin met her eyes. "I want you to be okay." There it was again. In her past life, she had mistaken it for devotion. She had carried it like a promise. This time, she heard what it really was. Permission. Arya nodded slowly. "I will be," she said. And for the first time, she meant it without him in the picture. Calvin exhaled, the tension leaving his shoulders as if something difficult had been resolved. As if the story had ended the way he needed it to. They didn't fight. They didn't bargain. They held each other once, briefly, carefully, as if acknowledging something already gone. as if honoring a version of themselves that could not follow them forward. When Calvin left the room, Arya sat alone on the couch, hands folded in her lap. She waited for devastation. For collapse. For the grief she remembered so vividly. It didn't come. What came instead was quiet. And in that quiet, something else surfaced, soft, aching, undeniable. Relief. Not relief that he was gone. Relief that the future she had already survived would never happen again. She hadn't been abandoned. She had stepped off a path before it circled back into ruin. Outside, the city kept moving. And for the first time in a long while, Arya let herself sit with the empty space. Not rushing to fill it. Not afraid of what it might become. Arya woke the next morning to quiet. Not the fragile quiet of something newly broken, but the kind that felt intentional. The apartment held her without asking anything in return. No expectations waiting in the kitchen. No presence she needed to accommodate. Her phone buzzed anyway. Calvin, did you sleep okay? She stared at the message, longer than she should have. She typed, deleted, retyped. Yes. 3 letters, complete, contained. The typing bubble appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Calvin, I just want to make sure you're all right. She closed the thread without responding. By midday, the industry had already caught up. Breakups like theirs didn't make headlines, but they rippled through assistants, managers, people who noticed which events Arya attended alone now. Mara walked into Arya's dressing room without knocking, took one look at her, and froze. Oh, she said, you're fine. Arya glanced up from her script. Should I not be? I thought you might be upset or sad. Mara sat beside her, studying her face carefully. Instead, you look like someone who stopped carrying something heavy. That made Arya smile, small, real. I don't feel empty, she admitted. I feel weightless. Mara nodded slowly. That could make you dangerous. I know. That night, the cast gathered at a quiet lounge, half celebration, half obligation. Lena had insisted. Darienne was already there when Arya arrived, standing near the bar with Sophia and Eli. Sophia noticed Arya first. Well, she said, eyes sweeping Arya from head to toe. You look like someone who chose herself. Eli blinked. Did I miss something? Arya hesitated only a fraction. Calvin and I ended things. Darienne didn't react. Not outwardly. But his hand stilled on his glass. Sophia's expression softened just slightly. Clean. Yes. Good, Sophia said firmly. Then don't let anyone rewrite it for you. Eli raised his glass. To clean endings. Darienne lifted his too. And clean beginnings, he added, careful, neutral, not directed at anyone in particular. Their eyes met over the rim of their glasses. Heat flickered. Unclaimed. Unspoken. Across the room, a familiar laugh cut through the low hum of conversation. Rita. She stood near Calvin, close enough to signal familiarity, far enough to imply restraint. Her hand brushed his arm when she laughed, just once, just long enough. Arya felt it then, not pain. Context. Rita spotted her almost immediately. Her smile sharpened. She crossed the room with the confidence of someone who believed she had already won something. Arya, Rita said brightly, I didn't know you'd be here. I didn't know it mattered, Arya replied calmly. Rita laughed, tilting her head. Calvin's been so helpful lately, showing me the ropes. It's nice to have someone who really believes in your potential. Calculating. The word echoed in Arya's mind. She glanced at Calvin. He looked pleased, not affectionate, not committed. Validated. That's great, Arya said evenly. Everyone deserves support. Rita's smile faltered just a hair. Darienne stepped closer then, not touching Arya, but clearly aligned with her space. Rita, he said politely, we haven't been introduced. Her eyes flicked to him, bright with recognition. Darienne Reed, I've heard so much. I'm sure, he replied mildly. Sophia choked on her drink. Rita recovered quickly. I hope we'll work together someday. Darienne inclined his head. Possibly. Nothing more. Nothing promised. Calvin cleared his throat. Arya, can we talk? She met his gaze, calm, steady. Not tonight, she said. It wasn't unkind. It wasn't negotiable. Calvin blinked, just once, as if recalibrating a script he thought he knew. Another time, he said. Another time, Arya agreed. She turned away first. Later on the balcony, the city stretched out before them, wide and indifferent and full of possibility. You handled that well, Darienne said quietly. I wasn't trying to handle anything, Arya replied. I was just exciting. He smiled at that, a real one. That's harder. They stood there, side by side, close enough to feel the warmth of each other's presence, far enough to keep the line intact. Sophia leaned out the door behind them. I'm stealing him, she told Arya. Don't worry, I'll return him mostly intact. Arya laughed, genuinely this time. As Darien was pulled away, he glanced back, lingering for a second before allowing himself to be pulled away. Arya stayed on the balcony a while longer, breathing in the night air, aware of the eyes on her, the paths opening and closing around her. The future was no longer something waiting to happen to her. It was something she was actively choosing. The first thing Arya did after the breakup was not cry. She opened her calendar. She stared at the shared apartment's lease, the neat digital rows of obligation and timing, and made a decision she'd been circling for days without naming. When Calvin came home that night, she was waiting for him, not on the couch, not hovering, but seated at the dining table with her laptop closed in front of her. We need to talk logistics, she said. Calvin paused. He smiled faintly like this was familiar ground. Okay. I'm moving out. The smile faltered, not dramatically, just enough to register surprise. You don't have to rush, he said gently. We can take time to. I don't want to, Arya replied, calm, steady, and I won't stay out of convenience. The silence stretched. This isn't punishment, she continued. It's clarity. We said we weren't carrying each other anymore. That has to mean space. Calvin nodded slowly. He always nodded first, processing before reacting. I just thought we were being mature about this. We are, she said. That was the moment something in him tightened. He didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He simply said, I didn't realize I was something you needed to get away from. Arya met his eyes. You're not, but the version of me who stays is. That landed harder than anger would have. The cafe mornings with Darien continued, not appointments, never labeled. That was part of what made them dangerous. That morning, Arya arrived exhausted. The kind of tired that lived behind the eyes, pressed there by back-to-back rehearsals and a late-night packing run she hadn't told anyone about. Darien noticed immediately. He didn't ask what was wrong. He glanced at her coffee, still untouched, and said, I have to reschedule our walk tonight. She blinked. You do? Yeah, he hesitated just a second. I could still make it work, but you look like you shouldn't. Something in her chest loosened. Tomorrow, he added, or whenever, no rush. She studied him, waiting for the catch, for the disappointment dressed up as patience. There wasn't one. Tomorrow's good, she said. He smiled, small and unassuming. Good. That was it. As he stood to leave, he slid a folded napkin toward her. She opened it. You look beautiful. She laughed soft, surprised, real. Darien watched her smile like it was something fragile and earned. That night Calvin texted. Can you come back later? I had a rough day. Arya stared at the message from the edge of the bed in her sister's guest room, half her clothes folded into neat piles, the rest still hanging in the apartment she no longer slept in. She typed, deleted, typed again. I'm packing tonight, we can talk tomorrow. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. I just need to vent, you're really good at listening. She exhaled. I'm not available for that anymore, Calvin. The reply took longer this time. Since when? Since always, she almost said. Instead. Since we broke up. When he didn't respond, she didn't bother to fill the silence. Rita Miller's name appeared everywhere that week. Not loudly, not triumphantly, just consistently. A casting notice shared too many times. A glowing mention in a panel recap. A photo tagged at an industry mixer Calvin had attended, one Arya had declined. Myra noticed it first. She's everywhere, she said, scrolling, like she learned the algorithm for visibility. Arya hummed noncommittally. And Calvin's name keeps popping up nearby, Myra added. Not attached, just adjacent. Arya's jaw tightened, not in jealousy but recognition. 2 nights later, Arya returned to the apartment to finish packing. Calvin had ordered takeout without asking. The bag sat on the counter like a piece, offering neither of them had named. We should probably eat, he said, since we're both here. She agreed. After all, she didn't hate Calvin. She just didn't trust him anymore. That wasn't the food fault. Over cardboard containers and cooling rice, Calvin mentioned Rita. She's sharp, he said casually. Ambitious, knows how to leverage a room. Arya looked at him. Is that what you're doing? He frowned. What? Leveraging rooms. He bristled. You make it sound irresponsible. I make it sound familiar. That stopped him. I'm not asking you to change anything, she continued, but I won't be part of it. Calvin leaned back, studying her like she'd changed languages. You've been distant. I've been honest. Then why does it feels like betrayal, he said quietly. Arya didn't flinch even as a future that will never be flashed across her mind. I don't think we were ever using the same definition of loyalty. The kiss happened on a Tuesday. unremarkable in every way except the moment itself. They were standing outside a small bookstore after a reading Sophia had dragged them both to, an event neither had planned to attend, which somehow made it better. The street was dim, the air cool enough to make breath visible if you looked closely. Darien was mid-sentence, complaining mildly about uncomfortable chairs, when Arya reached for his sleeve. The words died immediately. He stopped, not startled but alert, like something he'd been waiting for had finally moved. She didn't rush, she didn't apologize. She looked at him like she'd already decided and simply wanted him to know. "I want to do this," she said. For a fraction of a second, he didn't move. Then his gaze dropped to her mouth, back to her eyes, like he was recalibrating, discarding caution he'd been holding so carefully. "Okay," he said, voice lower than before. She kissed him. The response was immediate. Darien stepped into it, one hand coming up to her jaw, firm and certain, like he'd been restraining the instinct for weeks and was done pretending otherwise. The kiss deepened without hesitation, heat flaring, controlled but unmistakable, not desperate, not rough, but hungry in a way that made her breath catch. He kissed her like he meant it. Like this wasn't curiosity or impulse, but intention finally given permission. When they broke apart, it was because she exhaled against his mouth, not because either of them wanted to stop. His forehead rested briefly against hers. His breath was unsteady now. Her pulse was fast but steady, her thoughts were clear. That was the revelation. With him, she didn't disappear. "I'm not available for anything half-chosen," she said softly. His thumb brushed her cheek, grounding reverent. "I know." Then quieter, honest and heated all at once. "I've been waiting for you to say that." The industry gala was exactly what Arya expected. Too bright, too loud, too many people performing versions of themselves they hoped would be remembered. She arrived with Lena and Mara, hair swept back, dress simple but precise. She felt steady, not armored, just prepared, the way she'd learned to feel lately. Darien was already there. Not hovering, not waiting. He stood with a small group near the edge of the room, posture relaxed, expression neutral in that unreadable way that made people lean closer when he spoke. When he noticed her, his attention sharpened, not outwardly, not enough to invite commentary, but it held. He didn't cross the room. Instead, when the conversation he was in reached a natural lull, he excused himself with a quiet nod and came to her. "Hi," he said. It shouldn't have sounded intimate, it did anyway. "You clean up well," Arya replied lightly. "So do you." His gaze lingered, brief, intentional, before he turned to greet Lena and Mara with equal warmth. No secrets, no claiming, just presence. That was Darien at work. Professional, contained, exact. They were pulled into different conversations soon after. Arya spoke with a casting director she'd been circling for months. Darien was intercepted by a producer who wanted something she couldn't quite hear. From across the room, she watched him listen, actually listen, before responding. Watched the way he declined without alienating, the way he didn't promise things he couldn't deliver. She felt something warm and unfamiliar bloom in her chest. Pride. Later, when her feet started to ache and the noise pressed in too close, Arya stepped onto the balcony for air. Darien followed a moment later. Not immediately. Just when it mattered. "You okay?" he asked. "Yes," she said, then after a beat, "but I'm glad you came." His mouth curved, small real. "Me too." They stood side by side, city lights stretching below them. No touching, no urgency, just shared quiet. "You were impressive in there," she said. He glanced at her. "That's rare praise from you." "It's deserved," she replied. He accepted it like a gift. Inside, laughter erupted, too loud, too forced. Darien shifted slightly, angling his body toward her without thinking. She noticed. That night he left early. Not because he wanted to, but because she'd mentioned, offhand, that mornings were better for her lately. He didn't frame it as sacrifice. He didn't explain. He simply said, "I'll see you tomorrow." And meant it. The next afternoon, Arya ran into Calvin by accident. It happened outside a cafe she rarely went to now. He looked tired, sharper somehow. Rita stood beside him, polished, bright, her smile quick to assess. "Arya," Calvin said, surprised. "Hey." Rita's gaze slid to her, sharp and familiar. "We've met." Arya inclined her head. "We have." Rita smiled, polished, a touch too bright. "Calvin talks about you like your history." Arya glanced at Calvin. He didn't correct her. "Interesting." "Well," Arya said evenly, "I hope the industry's being kinder." Rita laughed. "It's being honest." Darien's presence was sudden, not dramatic, just there. He stepped to Arya's side, close enough to register, far enough to respect. "Ready?" he asked her. She nodded without hesitation. "Yeah." Calvin watched the exchange, the ease, the certainty. Something flickered across his face. Darien acknowledged him with a polite nod. Nothing territorial, nothing cold. Just final. As they walked away, Darienne's hand brushed Arya's lower back. Brief, grounding, unmistakably intimate. She leaned into it. That evening, they cooked together in Darienne's kitchen. Nothing elaborate, music low, sleeves rolled up. Darienne moved with quiet competence, handing her chopped herbs without being asked, shifting out of her way instinctively. "You're smiling," he observed. "I like watching you exist," she said honestly. That made him pause. He turned to her then. "Good," he said, "because I like being here." The kiss that followed was slower than the first. Deeper. Darienne's hands framed her waist, firm, sure. He kissed her like someone who knew exactly what he wanted and had chosen patience anyway. Arya responded without hesitation. Later, when they sat tangled on the couch, her head resting against his shoulder, he brushed his thumb along her arm absently. "You don't disappear with me," he said quietly. "Not a question." "No," she agreed, "I don't." "That matters," he said. She smiled. "It does." Outside, the city hummed on, indifferent, endless. Inside, for the first time in a long while, Arya didn't feel like she was balancing futures. She was simply choosing one. And Darienne was choosing her right back. The first time they spent time with Darienne's friends as a couple, it wasn't planned. It rarely was with him. They ended up at Eli's apartment on a Sunday afternoon that had started as coffee and turned into staying. Someone ordered food no one remembered choosing. Music played too loudly. Shoes were kicked off without ceremony. Darienne was different here. Not softer, broader. Eli sprawled across the couch like he owned it, loudly recounting a story Arya suspected had been told a dozen times already. Sophia sat cross-legged on the floor, glass of wine, balanced dangerously close to the edge of the coffee table, cutting in to correct details with surgical precision. "You left out the part where Darienne refused to take the deal," she said. Eli waved her off, "Because it was stupid." "Because it would have buried the junior director," Sophia corrected. "He didn't say a word about it, just walked." Arya looked at Darienne. He shrugged. "It was obvious." Sophia snorted. "It was not, that's why we like you." Later, when Darienne disappeared into the kitchen, Eli leaned toward Arya conspiratorially. "You make him different," he said easily. Arya blinked. "I'm not trying to." "I know," Eli replied. "That's the point." When Darienne returned, he handed Arya a drink without asking what she wanted. She smiled, he noticed. A week later, Darienne met her people. Brunch was Mara's idea. Neutral ground, she'd said, which meant interrogation with mimosas. Darienne arrived on time. Not early enough to perform, not late enough to apologize. He greeted everyone politely, then did something that immediately put Mara on edge. He listened. Mara noticed it halfway through her second story, the way he didn't jump in, the way he didn't mirror her energy to curry favor. "You're quieter than I thought you'd be," she said, eyes sharp with curiosity. Darienne glanced at Arya before answering, as if checking the temperature of the room rather than claiming it. "I tend to wait until I have something worth saying." Mara laughed despite herself. "Annoying, I like him." Lena said nothing at first. She watched the small things instead. How Darienne shifted his chair slightly when Arya leaned back. How he paused mid-sentence when she inhaled like she was about to speak, then didn't. How he never filled silences that weren't his. When Arya excused herself to take a call, Lena finally spoke. "You know she disappears when she feels managed," she said quietly. Darienne didn't flinch. "I've noticed. And the only thing I want her to feel is safe and loved." That earned his first real look from Lena. When Arya returned, Darienne didn't reach for her. He simply angled his body toward her again, space opening naturally. She slid her hand into his. He threaded his fingers through hers without comment. Across the table, Mara watched the exchange and smiled into her glass. "Yeah," she said softly, "that'll do." Time passed without needing to be marked. Weeks rearranged themselves around Darienne without either of them naming it. Mornings became theirs first, walks taken without destination, coffee cooling untouched while conversations wandered and doubled back. He learned her pace. She learned his silences. Playlists were shared without comment. Songs added quietly, removed without explanation. Sometimes she'd hear a new track and know exactly when he'd been thinking of her. He left notes the way other people left fingerprints, on the counter, inside a book. Once, folded into the pocket of her coat. Nothing romantic enough to demand a response, just enough to be found. When Darienne met her sister, it was over dinner that lingered longer than planned. Food cooled as conversation stretched. He arrived with a bottle of wine he'd been told not to bring and set it aside when her sister waved it off. He didn't try to steer the evening. He asked questions and waited for the answers, remembered small details, laughed when it was earned, quiet when it was. When the plates were finally cleared, he stood and helped without asking, rinsing dishes while Arya and her sister talked at the table. Arya watched from the doorway, something warm and steady settling in her chest. Later, as they said their goodbyes at the door, her sister drew Arya back for just a moment. "He's not trying to win me over," she said softly. Arya nodded. "He's not." Her sister's gaze held hers. "It's working on me." Arya smiled, not careless, not giddy, certain. "I'm aware." Because this wasn't momentum. It was choice, made quietly and kept. The run-in with Rita happened at an industry fundraiser. This time, Rita didn't pretend surprise. She approached Arya with confidence sharpened into brightness, Calvin trailing just behind her, attentive, impressed, slightly diminished. "You look well," Rita said, "different." "So do you," Arya replied honestly. Rita smiled wider. "Calvin and I are seeing each other." "That's nice," Arya said, "and meant I expected this, not I'm hurt." Calvin watched Arya's face, searching. He found nothing he could use. "That must feel strange," Rita continued lightly, "given everything." Arya tilted her head. "Does it?" Rita hesitated, just a beat too long. Darien appeared beside Arya, hand settling at the small of her back, not protective, just present. Rita's gaze flicked to it. Calvin S. followed. "Oh," Rita said softly, understanding dawning, something sharp flashing beneath the polish. "So this is serious." Arya smiled then, not sweet, not cruel. She simply said, "Yes." Rita laughed, but it rang thin. "Well, I'm happy for you." "I believe you want to be," Arya replied gently. Darien leaned closer, murmuring, "You okay?" "Yes," she said, "I am." And she was. As they walked away, Darien's fingers laced through hers fully this time, no restraint, no caution. Not hidden. Not rushed. Just real. Arya squeezed his hand once, grounding herself in the warmth of it, in the quiet certainty she'd earned. Darien brought it up the night before, while they were rinsing dishes side by side. "My dad's hosting dinner tomorrow," he said, tone casual, movements unhurried. "Just family." He glanced at her, not searching, not bracing, just present. "I'd like you to come," he added. "No expectations if you don't want to." Arya set the towel down and turned to face him. "Tell me how you feel about it." He didn't deflect. "I'm close to them," he said, "but I learned early how to manage rooms instead of just being in them. Having you there would make it easier to be myself." He paused, then clarified, because he always did. "Not because I need you to handle anything, just because I like who I am when you're there." That landed clean. Arya nodded slowly, not weighing obligation but intention. "Okay," she said, "then I want to come." He studied her for a beat, careful. "You're sure?" "Of course I want to go," she said. "Getting to know each other's families is normal. I like normal." Something in his chest eased at that. Not relief from fear, relief from being understood. "If it gets overwhelming," he said, "we can leave, or step out, or ignore everyone and stand in the kitchen." She smiled. "I'm good at kitchens." He laughed quietly, then leaned in and kissed her forehead. "Thank you." She met his gaze, steady and warm. "You don't have to thank me," she said. "This is something I want too." The house felt different from the gala spaces Darien usually occupied. Lived in, quietly elegant. The kind of place that didn't explain itself because it never had to. Claire opened the door before they knocked. "Oh good," she said, eyes flicking between them with open satisfaction. "You brought her." Darien sighed. "Hello to you too." Claire grinned and pulled Arya into a quick hug before she could protest. "I'm Claire." Again, properly this time, "Come in." Inside, the atmosphere was warm, but attentive. Conversations paused just long enough to adjust when they entered. Not suspicion. Interest. The kind that leaned in instead of closing ranks. Darien's hand brushed Arya's back, not to guide, just to anchor. Introductions unfolded easily. An aunt who smiled like she was remembering something fond. A cousin who asked Arya about rehearsal schedules instead of accolades. A family friend who laughed and said, "So this is who finally got him to stop answering emails at midnight." Arya smiled. "I didn't stop him." Darien added dryly, "She just stared at me until I noticed the time." That earned a chorus of knowing laughter. At the table, the rhythms settled quickly. Darien was quieter here, not withdrawn, just positioned. He listened, responded when needed, took on responsibility out of reflex, then caught himself and let someone else reach first. Arya noticed. So did everyone else. "That look," Claire said suddenly, pointing her fork at him. "That's the one." Darien blinked. "What look?" The one where you're about to fix something no one asked you to fix, his aunt said mildly. His father didn't look up from his glass. You've had it since you were 12. Darien winced. I was efficient. You were anxious, Claire corrected. Efficiency came later. Arya laughed softly, surprised, delighted. Has he done the thing with the tea in front of you yet? Claire asked, turning to her. Arya's brows lifted. You mean starting it when he's thinking, then forgets it entirely? Claire laughed. Yes, that's it. His cousin leaned forward. He also reorganizes bookshelves when he's stressed, doesn't matter whose. Darien closed his eyes. This is deeply unfair. And yet, his father said calmly, finally looking up, accurate. Something shifted, not exposure, but ease. A shared picture forming, piece by piece, from people who already loved him. Arya added lightly, he also listens all the way through, even when he disagrees. That earned her a look from Darien, soft, a little startled. That's not a quirk, his father said. That's character. Later, while dishes were being cleared, Darien's father gestured toward the window. Walk with me. Arya followed without hesitation. You don't try to manage him, his father said after a moment. Arya smiled faintly. He wouldn't tolerate that. No, he agreed. He'd just carry it quietly. They watched the room for a beat, Claire laughing too loudly, Darien leaning against the counter, shoulders finally loose. He's always been steady, his father continued, but steadiness can become armor. Arya didn't rush her answer, only when he thinks he's alone in it. His father looked at her then, not measuring, not testing. Seeing. I'm glad he has you, he said finally. They left late. Not because Darien lingered, because he didn't have to flee. In the car, the city sliding past in muted streaks of light, he stayed quiet longer than usual. You okay? Arya asked. He exhaled slowly. I didn't realize how much of myself I edit around them. She reached for his hand. He took it immediately. You didn't tonight, she said. He glanced at her, because you were there. That did something to her chest. At a stoplight, he turned fully toward her, thumb brushing her knuckles. You saw me, he said, not insecurity, vulnerability, all of it. She leaned in, forehead resting against his. I liked who I saw. His restraint cracked, not shattered but opened. The kiss was unhurried and intense, all the things he'd held back surfacing with intention. His hand slid to her waist, steady but unmistakably wanting. When they pulled apart, his voice was rough. This doesn't feel like pressure. No, she agreed, it feels like clarity. He smiled then, real, unguarded. And for the first time, Arya understood something essential. Darien Reed hadn't just chosen her despite the weight of his past. He had chosen her because she could stand inside it with him. The collapse did not announce itself. It arrived the same way it had the first time. Through emails that stopped being returned, meetings that turned vague, and numbers that refused to line up no matter how long Calvin stared at them. At first, he didn't panic. He told Rita it was temporary, market fluctuation, bad timing. Victor would smooth it over, Victor always did. Rita believed him. Why wouldn't she? For weeks, things had been going her way. Calvin had been generous lately, attentive in the way men got when they believed they were ascending. He pulled favors without being asked, introductions, endorsements, invitations that arrived with her name already attached. He talked about their future with the confidence of someone who thought the math would always work out in his favor. Rita basked in it. At events, she stood a little straighter, laughed a little louder. Let people see her hand on his arm, his attention orbiting her. When someone mentioned Arya, because someone always did, Rita smiled like it was an old headline. That chapter's closed, she said lightly. We've both moved on. Calvin nodded when she said it. He needed it to be true. The first meeting fell through on a Wednesday. The second was rescheduled indefinitely. By Friday, Victor stopped answering his calls. Calvin left 3 voicemails, polite, controlled, then less so. On Monday, his assistant quietly mentioned that 2 vendors were asking for revised payment timelines. Calvin laughed it off. Tell them we'll talk next quarter, he said. Cash flow's just tight. It was only when he logged into the account, their account, that the air finally left his lungs. The numbers hadn't dipped. They'd vanished. He sat there longer than he meant to, staring at the screen like it might correct itself if he waited. Only in this life, there was no Arya moving quietly in the background, no call already made, no contingency already in motion. When he finally told Rita, he framed it carefully. There's been a delay, he said, nothing serious. She frowned. You said that last week. I know, he replied, sharper than intended, and I'm handling it. Rita's expression shifted, not fear yet, calculation. And Victor, she asked. Calvin swallowed. He's unavailable. That was when Rita stepped back. Not physically. Socially. Her messages grew shorter. Her calendar filled mysteriously. She stopped mentioning him in rooms where it mattered, stopped tagging him in posts that framed them as a unit. When an invitation arrived without his name attached, she didn't question it. She went anyway. Calvin noticed the distance before he understood it. By the time the official notice came, contracts voided, partnerships dissolved, it was too late for denial. His phone buzzed constantly, not with help. With reminders. Bills, deadlines, people who wanted answers he didn't have. Victor never resurfaced. Rita didn't leave dramatically. She simply stopped including him in her life. One night, after a dinner she canceled last minute, Calvin sat alone in his apartment and thought, truly thought for the first time in years. About the way, when his business was first starting, Arya used to sit at the table with her laptop open, jewelry spread out beside her like collateral. About the way she'd said, "I'll handle it," without asking if she should. About how the fall hadn't crushed him then, because she'd been beneath it, bracing. The realization landed heavy. This was what she'd carried. This weight. This silence. This slow, humiliating unraveling. And she had done it without applause. Without gratitude. Without him ever noticing. Calvin reached for his phone. Stopped. There was no version of this where she came back. Not to save him. Not to soften it. Not to absorb the damage so he could stand intact. For the first time, the fall went all the way through. And Arya, steady, distant, chosen by someone else, did not look back. Arya's life did not explode into success. It settled. Projects came steadily now, not the frantic kind, not the ones that demanded she contort herself into something more palatable. People returned her calls, listened when she spoke, remembered her name without needing reminders. Her work was respected. She noticed the change most in her body. The way she no longer woke up braced, the way her shoulders rested where they were meant to, the way hunger came back, not desperate, not numbed, but honest. She slept through the night. She laughed more easily. Her heart, once clenched around contingency plans and borrowed responsibility, moved through the world unburdened. Darien fit into this life, the way sunlight fits a room already standing. There was no scramble to make space for him, no negotiation of worth. He arrived as himself and stayed because he chose to. Their love did not dim with routine. It sharpened. Mornings were still theirs first, sometimes in silence, sometimes tangled in conversation that wandered nowhere important. Darien learned the exact moment Arya needed coffee instead of questions. Arya learned when his quiet meant thinking, and when it meant holding something heavy he hadn't named yet. They touched often. Not possessively. Affirmatively. A hand at her waist as he passed behind her, her fingers brushing his wrist when she laughed. Heat exchanged in glances that promised later without demanding now. Their passion did not burn them out. It anchored them. At work, Darien remained precise, professional, unreadable to those who didn't know him, but in rooms where it mattered, among friends, family, quiet dinners that stretched long past the plates, he made no secret of choosing her. One evening, months after the gala, they stood on her balcony watching the city soften into night. Darien leaned back against the railing, Arya tucked easily between his arms, her head resting against his chest. "You seem at peace," he murmured. She smiled. "I worked hard for it." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "I see that." She turned then, studying him in the half-light, the man who did not ask her to disappear, the man who met her strength without trying to take it. "I'm glad it's you," she said. He didn't deflect, didn't joke. "So am I," he replied, "every day." Thank you so much for listening to Dusklit Audio. Please leave a heart in the comments if you enjoyed the story.